a close-up shot of our sun gold cherry tomatoes. They're always one of the first tomatoes to ripen during the growing season. Very, very sweet too. You can see once they're ripe, they fall right off the vine when they're picked. You could pick the whole trellis and wait for the unripe ones to ripen up on your kitchen counter, or you could leave them on the vine until they're perfectly ripe. Here's some harvested basil, a beautiful bright green color. I try to harvest my basil before it starts to flower. You can eat the flowers, but once a plant starts to go to flower, it will produce less leaves. So as basil ages through the summer, its stems will become a bit woodier. You can try to use your fingers to snap the stems, but I think scissors makes life a little bit easier. You cut right below the flowering stem, and then it will grow back more leaves. And here we are in the Learning Garden at UVM-MC. Someone is growing a beautiful row of corn. There, with the little hair on top, is the corn growing in its husk. And here's a close-up of the corn on the stalk. Once those little hairs, known as corn silk, start to become a bit more brown and dried out, that's when you know the corn is ready. This corn is definitely not ready yet. When you plant corn, you'll see how the seeds are just corn kernels. Corn should be planted in a few rows or a patch for optimal fertilization. It's best to grow them in a patch so the wind doesn't knock down a flimsy line of corn. And if you grow one corn stalk, you might not get an entirely fertilized corn husk. The wind helps to spread the pollen across the patch, but the patch stays stronger if it has more and more corn stalks to protect it.
So corn is actually a grain, not a vegetable technically. It's a grain like wheat or rice, and it's been grown throughout the Western Hemisphere for thousands of years. Of course, now it is also grown in other parts of the world. Because of its carbohydrate and protein content, it's really been a nutritional staple in native cultures forever. Frozen or canned corn has about the same amount of nutrition as fresh corn, so you don't have to worry if you can't get fresh corn for this recipe. All corn is a good source of vitamin C, but the yellow varieties have more vitamin A as beta-carotene, as well as other carotenoids. So corn also has some iron, zinc, potassium, magnesium, and phosphorus. And it has about 3 grams of protein in an ear, or a half a cup is about the same as an ear, and about 2 grams of fiber in an ear and 20 grams of carbohydrate. So we're going to do a tomato, corn, and/or chickpea, and/or cucumber salad. This is basically a catch-all for all the wonderful garden bounty that you might have around in late summer. What I'm putting into this recipe today is approximately 20 cherry tomatoes, about 20 basil leaves, 3 ears of corn on the cob, a cucumber, salt, pepper, oil, and vinegar, and that's it. Okay, we're going to the shucking of the corn here with this beautiful corn that we see before us. We're going to pull all the outer leaves off, break off the tail of the corn where it was attached to the stalk, and pull off some of the extra corn silk, those long silky fibers that we see. Here we have boiling water in a large stock pot. This is about an 8-quart stock pot that I filled about halfway up with water. We are going to slip these 4 corns in there. They will float on top, which is normal. Then the water will come back to a boil, and once it boils again, I reduce the heat to a simmer. A simmer is when the bubbles are just breaking on top of the water. And I cook corn for about 7 minutes. The fresher the corn, the less time you need to boil it for, because the kernels have more moisture content in them. Also, the sweeter the variety, the less time it takes. Okay, gonna take this cooked corn out of the pot. If you don't have the tongs that I'm using here to remove this corn from the pot, you can just drain the corn into a colander just like you would pasta. Be careful of the very, very hot water. Okay, there they are, ready for the next part of our recipe. So we will stand the corn on its end, and we have a fairly flat surface there. Keeping your fingers out of the way of the knife, of course. Just cut down, and off those kernels come. I even go for the little bits on the end here because I love corn. And then I'll kind of break up the strips of kernels that came off in the bowl, so that most of the kernels are separated and able to absorb the yummy oil and vinegar that we'll put on them. Okay, we've now got our basil. So we're going to pull off some leaves, just pop them off the stem. So we'll estimate about roughly 20, and let's start with that much and see how that is. And remember that technique, it's called a chiffonade, and it means roll them up, cut up the rolled leaves, and if you want the long strips that you get from that, you can just throw them in that way, or you can cut it up a little finer. And I think that for this dish, I am going to cut it up finer using our good old quarter turn chop. Remember to grip way up on the knife, and in they go. Okay, we've rinsed our tomatoes off, and we're gonna pop those cute little green tops off of them. You don't have to cut the cherry tomatoes in half. I just like to because I find they are a bit smaller and, manageable. Now we'll chop the cucumber up and throw it in. This is really just because we have them, and it's good to know that you can put all sorts of things in this recipe. The next step will be mixing it, and then the oil and vinegar. Add a little pinch of salt and pepper, which is optional. So we'll add the oil, and I measured it out over a bowl in case I were to spill some. And then the same thing with the vinegar, 2 tablespoons or to taste. And this is a recipe that when it sits in the fridge and marinates and you taste it tomorrow, the flavors will all likely taste a little bit stronger. So it's good to err on the side of caution when you're making a salad with an acid in it. So here's our delicious tomato, corn, and basil salad. It's just a beautiful showcase of fresh foods, highlighted by a little oil and vinegar. Doesn't really need anything else to be a nutritious, delicious eating experience.